So you and I, we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor Era Tapestry. In the winter of 1495, a Sheen palace stood cloaked in the crystalline shroud of frost, its turrets glistening like polished silver under a pale sky. Elizabeth sat in a fire-lit hearth, the crackle of cedar logs filling the air. Her carved oak chair, cushioned with embroidered velvet, cradled her weary frame. At 30, her beauty was tempered by grief's quiet weight, her heart heavy with mourning for her husband's uncle Jasper Tudor, Duke of Bedford, whose death in December had carved a void in the Tudor court. Jasper, her Aunt Catherine Woodville's husband and King Henry VII's uncle, had been a pillar of loyalty, raising King Henry in exile and wielding his sword at Bosworth in 1485 to secure the crown. His gentle tales of chivalry had captivated her children, their eyes wide in the nursery's glow. He had been the closest thing to a grandfather her children had known. His passing, following the September death of her 3-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth, whose laughter once danced through the halls, left Eliza's chest hollow, a silent tide of grief beneath her serene facade. Jasper's role as Lord High Steward was taken over by Edward Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, Jasper's stepson and Eliza's cousin, whose new prominence stirred the court's delicate balance. As the Queen's cousin, raised by the same man as the King had been since the age of 7, he was a safe choice. In the nursery, Eliza guided 6-year-old Meg's hands in embroidering crimson roses, the Tudor emblem, while 15-year-old Elizabeth Howard, a young lady-in-waiting whose keen eyes and quiet grace brought gentle warmth to the chamber, adjusted threads with a deft touch. Arthur, 9, studied Latin nearby, his brow bent over Cicero, while 4-year-old Henry chased shadows with a mischievous spark. The court, reeling from Perkin Warbeck's failed invasion, buzzed with unease. The nobles, whispering of the pretender's claim to be Eliza's lost brother Richard, a spectre haunting her dreams. Eliza shielded her children, her voice soothing as she hosted gatherings in the great hall, a tender counterpoint to her mother-in-law Margaret Beaufort's stern vigilance. Elizabeth Howard, ever attentive, moved gracefully among the guests, her loyalty a quiet support to Eliza's diplomacy, learned from her mother, who had been lady-in-waiting to 2 queens, Elizabeth Woodville and Anne Neville. And that had been an awkward transition. As frost yielded to buds, Eliza discovered that she was with child, a quiet joy tempered by childbirth's perils and the court's unrest. The pregnancy stirred hope for another heir, yet carried the bitter-sweet weight of little Elizabeth's loss, her golden-haired daughter, whose tiny hands once clutched Eliza's fingers, a shadow in the nursery's warmth. When Mary was born, swaddled in cloth of gold and baptized in the church of the observant friars, Eliza gazed into her cradle, her heart tangled with love and sorrow. Mary's coos and bright eyes, so like her sister's, sparked a tenderness and piercing grief, a gift and a reminder. In quiet moments, Eliza traced Mary's features, her fingers trembling, her chapel prayers pleading for strength to love without fear. Eliza confided in Margaret Beaufort, whose fervent prayers entrusted physicians. Their robes, heavy with chamomile and rosehip, enveloped her in care. In a candlelit chamber draped with green damask, Eliza penned letters to her cousin Maggie Pole, sharing news of her pregnancy and Mary's birth. Cautious words on vellum, mindful of Harry's spies and Warbeck's rebellion festering in Scotland. Eliza's letters spoke of hope for Mary, and shared grief for little Elizabeth and Maggie's brother Edward, confined in the Tower, their bond a quiet defiance. As winter softened into spring, Eliza's strength wavered, her body weary, yet her spirit turned steadfast, fueled by Mary's health and the dynasty's future. She strolled Sheen's gardens, the scent of budding roses evoking her mother's counsel to nurture peace through love. Mary's tiny hand, grasping her finger, anchored Eliza to hope, though each smile echoed little Elizabeth's laughter, a bittersweet resolve that Eliza bore, her love for her living children a vow to shield them from the shadows of loss and rebellion. The air heavy with the scent of lavender and freshly scythed grass, Margaret Beaufort stood as the unyielding pillar of the Tudor dynasty. Her chamber, its oak panels warmed by slanting light, was a sanctuary of purpose, where tapestries of lions and lilies shimmered faintly in the glow of beeswax candles, their faint honeyed scent mixing with ink on her desk. Her ledger lay open, its pages dense with figures sustaining the fragile might of her son King Henry VII's crown. The court hummed with the recent birth of Princess Mary, Eliza's fifth child, born in March, her delicate cries a thread weaving hope into the delicate Tudor lineage. Margaret's heart, tempered by years of loss and strategy, stirred with a quiet triumph at this new life, though the shadows of her granddaughter Elizabeth's death the previous year and Jasper Tudor's recent passing lingered like a chill in her bones. The christening had been a solemn affair, suitable for a fifth royal child. Eliza had emerged from childbirth, radiant but fragile, her frame delicate from the strain of bearing Mary. The summer found her in the airy nursery, its stone walls softened by embroidered hangings of green and gold, tending her children with a quiet grace that masked her weariness. Margaret ensured the house was a fortress of care, dispatching her trusted physicians, their rolls heavy with the scent of chamomile and rosehip, to administer tonics and to monitor Eliza's recovery with hawk-like vigilance. She handpicked nurses and ladies-in-waiting, their loyalty as unyielding as her own, to cradle Mary and shield the Queen from strain. The nursery rang with the voices of Arthur, his scholars poised bent over Latin texts, Meg, her laughter bright as summer rain, and Henry, a spark of mischief, an empty space where Elizabeth could have played. Margaret's stern countenance softened as she watched them, her visits a ritual of oversight, ensuring tutors sharpened Arthur's mind for kingship while Eliza's health was fortified, her every smile a victory against the perils of childbirth. As autumn 1496 swept over Sheen Palace, the golden haze gave way to crisp air and the sharp tang of wood smoke curling from chimneys into a sky bruised with early dusk. Margaret's days grew longer, her quill scratching late into the night as she orchestrated the delicate threads of her son's reign. The harvest had been bountiful, and the court's coffers swelled with tithes, yet whispers of unrest from the north pricked her vigilance. Her spies, cloaked in wool and discretion, brought reports of discontent, and Margaret, her gray eyes narrowing over a ledger, allocated funds to bolster garrisons, her mind a chessboard where every move countered a shadow. The death of her brother-in-law, Jasper Tudor, still weighed heavy, his absence a void in her counsel, but she pressed forward, her will an iron scaffold for the Tudor name. Eliza, now stronger, moved through the palace with quiet resilience, embroidering swaddling clothes for Mary, whose rosy cheeks bloomed with health. Margaret noted it with a flicker of satisfaction, though her gaze lingered on Eliza's pallor, alert for any sign of relapse. The physicians, their satchels heavy with vials of fennel and vervain, reported steady progress, but Margaret's orders remained unyielding. Broths of marrow and herbs, rest, and no undue strain. She ensured the royal children's routines were unbroken. Arthur, now nearing 11, drilled in rhetoric and statecraft under tutors hand-picked for their loyalty. Meg, her nimble fingers mastering the lute, and young Henry, his boundless energy channeled into archery and horsemanship, though his tutors despaired of his wandering attention. Margaret's visits to the nursery were both duty and solace, her stern lips curving faintly as Henry tugged her sleeve, begging for tales of knights, while she steered him back to his primers. Winter descended, cloaking Sheen in frost. The court turned inward, its halls alive with Yule festivities, minstrels plucking lutes, their melodies weaving through the scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced wine. Margaret orchestrated the celebrations with precision, ensuring the court's splendor reflected Henry VII's growing power. Yet her mind never strayed from the Cornish threat. By January 1497, reports confirmed the rebels' march. their numbers swelling as they crossed into Devon. Margaret, her breath clouding in the chill of the chamber, penned letters to royal lords, her script as sharp as her resolve, summoning men and arms to quell the stirrings before they reached London. Eliza, insulated from such matters, presided over the 12th night feast, her crown glinting as she gifted alms to the poor, her gentleness a counterpoint to Margaret's steel. Spring 1497 broke with a tentative warmth, the palace gardens stirring with snowdrops, and the faint hum of bees. The Cornish rebellion loomed closer, its shadow darkening Margaret's calculations. But she shielded Eliza from the worst, ensuring the Queen's days were filled with music and the chatter of her children. Arthur, now betrothed to Catherine of Aragon, in a diplomatic triumph, bore the weight of his future with a boy's earnestness, his thin shoulders squared as he memorized Spanish phrases. Margaret watched him closely, their heart a tangle of pride and fear, knowing the crown's future rested on his fragile frame. Eliza, blooming with the season, took to riding again, her laughter echoing across the dew-soaked lawns. Though Margaret's physicians trailed her, their murmurs of caution a constant refrain. Mary, now a year old, toddled through the nursery. By April, as the rebellion's threat sharpened, Margaret's chamber became a war room. Maps unfurled across her table, pins marking rebel movements. She dispatched messengers to her son, King Henry, who prepared to meet the insurgents, while she fortified Sheen's defenses, her commands crisp as the spring air. Yet even in the storm, she carved moments for the children, her voice softening as she read to Meg from a psalter, its vellum pages worn smooth by years of prayer. Eliza, sensing the tension, but spared the details, poured her strength into her family, her presence a quiet anchor. Margaret, watching her daughter-in-law cradle Mary under the budding oaks, felt a rare stillness, a moment where the weight of crowns and rebellions lifted, if only briefly, in the fragile bloom of spring. In the summer of 1497, Maggie's thoughts grew heavy with unease. Her loyalty to the Tudors tangled with fear for her brother still in the Tower. At 21, Edward still had his Plantagenet name, a chain that had bound him since childhood. The spectre of Perkin Warbeck, the pretender claiming to be Richard of York, their long-lost cousin, cast a lengthening shadow over her heart. Warbeck's rebellion festering in Scotland under James IV's patronage. It was a blade held to the Tudor throat, and to Edward's safety. Maggie, ever astute, knew that whispers of Yorkist loyalists could paint her brother as a rival claimant, a danger Henry VII could not ignore. At Sheen Palace, where she often joined Eliza's household, Maggie overheard courtiers murmur of Warbeck's audacity, his claims stirring disaffected lords. Her visits to the nursery, where Mary slept under embroidered hangings and young Henry tumbled with laughter, were bittersweet, each smile a reminder of the fragility of her own family. By autumn, as leaves turned to amber, Maggie's worries deepened. Her brother's imprisonment, meant to neutralize his claim, now seemed a prelude to graver peril. Warbeck's letters, smuggled across the Channel, boasted of foreign support, and Maggie, privy to court whispers, feared Henry's patience with the Plantagenet heirs might fray. In her chambers, lit by flickering tallow and scented with dried rosemary, she penned careful letters to trusted family, urging discretion. Her words veiled to avoid suspicion. Her prayers in the chapel, where the air hung heavy with wax and sanctity, were fervent pleas for Edward's safety. Her knees pressed to the cold stone as she sought divine mercy. Maggie's role at Mary's christening had bound her to the Tudors, but Warbeck's shadow and her brother's fate wove a thread of dread through her heart, her every step a delicate balance between duty and the blood that might yet betray her. Maggie stood at the heart of Tudor court. At 24, her face, framed by a somber gable hood, bore the quiet strength of Plantagenet lineage. But her eyes held the flicker of unease. The news of Perkin Warbeck's failed invasion, a storm that had broken upon Cornwall's shores, stirred both relief and fear in her, each report a thread to the perilous tapestry of her family's fate. Warbeck, the pretender who dared claim the name of Richard the York, had landed at Whitesand Bay on September 7, his banners raised, with the confidence of a false king. Maggie, privy to the court dispatches, learned of this march through Cornwall. rallying some 6,000 discontented souls, their anger stoked by heavy taxes and old Yorkist sympathies. Her thoughts turned to Edward, still caged in the tower, his very existence a spark that could ignite such rebellions. She knew Warbeck's claims, if believed, painted her brother as a rival claimant, a threat that Henry VII might not abide. In the palace's great halls, where minstrels played and wine flowed under chandeliers of Tudor roses, Maggie maintained her composure, her velvet gown brushing the rushes as she moved among nobles, her ears catching whispers of the Pretender's advance on Exeter. Her prayers in the chapel, where incense curled like a sacred vow, and saints gazed from the stained glass, were fervent, not only for the Tudor crown, but for Edward's life, each beat of her rosary a plea against the axe. By late September, as leaves fell like scattered gold, Warbeck's rebellion unraveled. His ragtag army faltered at Exeter's unyielding walls, and by October 4, cornered, he surrendered, his dreams of a Yorkist crown crumbling like ash. Maggie at Richmond received the tidings with guarded breath, her relief tempered by the weight of what followed. Warbeck's capture, his confession as a Fleming, unmasked under Henry's stern gaze, was a triumph for the Tudors, yet it tightened the noose around Edward. The court buzzed with Warbeck's humiliation, paraded as a curiosity, but Maggie's mind churned with fear. Her brother's Plantagenet blood, once a shield, now marked him as a lingering threat. In her chamber, her quill paused over letters to loyal family, her words coded to shield her thoughts, each stroke a silent vow to protect Edward. The memory of Mary Tudor's christening in 1496, where Maggie had stood as godmother, bound her to the Tudors' future. But Warbeck's failure and capture cast a darker shadow, her heart torn between duty to the crown and the brother whose fate hung by a fraying thread. In the autumn of 1497, as the winds swept through Richmond Palace carrying the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, Princess Meg danced through the corridors with a child's unburdened grace. The palace, its stone walls softened by tapestries of blooming roses and gold lions, hummed with the subdued triumph of a kingdom spared from chaos. The news of Perkin Warbeck's failed invasion and capture in October stirred the court. But to young Margaret, the world was a tapestry of nursery games and fleeting glimpses of adult whispers. Her small frame clad in velvet, a tiny Tudor rose embroidered at her throat. The season's chill did little to dim her lively spirit. In the nursery, where sunlight slanted through the leaded windows, Meg giggled with her brother Harry, their play a whirlwind of wooden swords and tales of knights, while their elder brother Arthur, 11, pored over Latin texts, his brow serious with a prince's duty. Their mother Eliza, still radiant, but touched by the weariness of her recent confinement, oversaw their games, her laughter a rare melody in a court taut with Warbeck's recent threat. Meg, unaware of the Pretender's confinement, sensed only the shift of the palace's rhythm, the hurried steps of messengers, the clink of armored guards, the low voices of her grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, whose stern presence loomed like a guardian shadow. The great hall, where chandeliers flickered with waxen roses and roasted venison, scented the air. Young Meg sat at the high table, her small hands clutching her silver goblet, her eyes wide at the tales of Warbeck's capture. The court buzzing with his confession. A mere Fleming, no Yorkist prince. Yet the name stirred a flicker of unease in Eliza, whose gaze lingered on her children. Meg, too young to grasp the specter of rebellion, felt only the warmth of her mother's hand, the pride of her place among the Tudors. In the chapel, where incense curled and stained glass glowed with saints' faces, she knelt beside Eliza, her tiny voice echoing prayers for the king's safety, but unaware that her grandmother's wealth had fortified the crown against Warbeck's folly. Yet even in her innocence, Meg was a thread in the dynasty's weave. Her grandmother, ever vigilant, saw in her future a plan for alliances. Her betrothal to King James IV of Scotland was already a whisper in diplomatic chambers, a seed to bind the Isles. In the grey dawn of October, 1497, 11-year-old Catherine of Aragon stood in the shadowed corridor, her hands clasped tightly, her breath shallow as the weight of loss pressed against her chest. The air was heavy with the scent of wax from candles that burned ceaselessly in the chamber beyond, where her brother, Juan, lay dead at 17. His once radiant smile stilled forever. The palace, a fortress of golden stone, seemed to hold its breath, its ornate shelves carved into the walls dulled by grief. Catherine, clad in a somber gown of velvet, its hem brushing the cold tiles, bore the poise of her mother's training. Yet her blue eyes, usually bright with a child's curiosity, were clouded with sorrow, their lashes damp from tears she fought to hide. Juan, the only male heir to the united crowns of Castile and Aragon, had been the sun of their family, his delicate health belied by his laughter and his dreams of a Spain that would outshine Rome. His marriage to Margaret of Austria just 6 months prior had filled the court with joy, their union a bridge to the Holy Roman Empire. But fever had stolen him, swift and merciless, in the early days of autumn, leaving behind a widow, a kingdom, and a sister whose heart ached with questions she dared not voice. Catherine lingered outside the chamber where her mother kept vigil, her father, King Ferdinand, at her side. The door, carved with pomegranate, stood ajar, revealing glimpses of Isabella kneeling beside Juan's body, her graying hair uncovered, her face etched with grief too vast for tears. Ferdinand, his jaw tight, murmured to a bishop, his voice low, discussing masses and succession, his pragmatism a shield against pain. Catherine longed to run to her mother, to bury her face in her skirts as she had as a child. But duty held her still. She clutched a small prayer book, its leather worn from years of use, its pages open to a prayer for the dead. Her lips moved, but her heart stumbled, picturing Juan's smile, his teasing voice as he'd shown her a mechanical clock in Toledo, its gears ticking like a promise of forever. Nobles in black cloaks moved like shadows, their whispers of succession, of Juan's unborn child. She remembered Juan's wedding, a spring tapestry of flowers and song where she danced with her sisters, her auburn hair braided with pearls, her laughter mingling with his. Now that memory felt like a dream, fading in the cold light of loss. Kneeling before a gilded altar, Catherine lit a candle, its flame wavering like her faith in a world where God could take her brother. That afternoon she was permitted to see Juan's body laid out in state, draped with cloth of gold. His face pale as marble bore no traces of pain, his hands folded over a jeweled cross. She placed a sprig of rosemary plucked from the palace garden beside Juan's head, its sharp scent a final farewell. Beyond the palace, Spain mourned its prince. In the streets, women wailed, and monks chanted, their voices rising with the smoke of incense. Catherine, glimpsing the crowds from window, saw a sea of black veils, a mirror of her own sorrow. Yet the court's undercurrents stirred. Ferdinand's envoys spoke of securing alliances, of her own betrayal to Arthur, Prince of Wales, a union now more urgent, to bind England to Spain's faltering dynasty. Catherine, aware of the talks, imagined Arthur as a shadowy figure, a boy across the sea whose letters, formal and Latin, spoke of duty, not love. She wondered if he, too, knew loss, if his misty lands held sorrows like hers. In the quiet of her chamber that night, Catherine knelt before a small virgin statue. The city's bells tolled, and the wind carried the scent of autumn leaves, brittle and fleeting. She prayed, her voice steady now, for strength to bear her family's burden, to be the daughter Spain needed. Her prayer book's illumination of St. Catherine, her namesake, glowed with defiance, and Catherine traced it, vowing to be brave, as Juan had been, as her mother was. She dreamed of him, standing in a field of gold, his laughter free, but woke to the cold reality of Spain without its heir. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.